Thank you everyone for joining us today. The Massachusetts LGBT Chamber of Commerce welcomes you to this webinar. And again, a big thank you to our panelists. My name is Thais DeMarco. I am the Director of Membership and Engagement at the Chamber. And thank you again for being here today. A couple of notes about the webinar before I pass the torch to Cheryl, who will moderate today. There's a closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. So if you would like to have that function enabled, all you have to do is click on it. Another quick note is that we suggest that you have a gallery view on your screen so you can see all of the panelists at the same time. And then the last bit of info is that we have a Q&A box at the bottom. Again, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box and you can pop in any questions that you have and we'll address them all at the end. If they're not addressed during the body of the conversation by our panelists, we will address them all at the end with the wonderful Michael O'Neill, who's my colleague at the Chamber. He'll pop in and read the questions. So without further ado, thank you again to everybody for being here. A huge, huge thank you to our panelists. And Cheryl will introduce everyone now. Thank you, Cheryl.
Great, thanks Thais. And thanks so much to the Chamber for asking us to do this. It's been a real honor. And I get a chance to connect with some of my friends who we haven't had a chance to work together this year because of the pandemic, as we usually would. But we're really excited to share our experiences, both professionally and our lived experiences with all the folks in the audience. So my name is Sheryl Caton, she and her pronouns. And I'll sort of act as a moderator today and I'll participate as well from time to time. But for the most part, our three panelists, I'll just give you their name and I'll let them do some more self-introductions. So I'm gonna start with Michelle Hirsch. Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, my name is Michelle, she, her. I'm a transgender woman. The probably two primary things. Professionally, I'm the head of product management and product marketing for a software platform called MATLAB. So I work for a company, a software company in Natick called MathWorks, and been there about 20 years, manage a platform with a $250 million platform with about 4 million users. And then outside of work, one of my main things is I'm a board member of TCNE, the Trans Club of New England, and a co-chair for our usually annual first event conference for transgender people in the Boston area.
Fantastic, thanks, Michelle. And Irene, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the panel today?
Sure. So I am Irene. I use she, her pronouns. I am a cisgender woman who has a transgender daughter. So that's how I found my way to this wonderful group of people. I also work for an insurance company here in Massachusetts where on our Pride ERG, I act as our transgender liaison and our gender transition partner. In addition to that, in my night job, or other than my day job, I do some consulting work around the transgender experience in the workplace, right? So making sure that policies, practices, buildings, all of those things are set up for transgender people, making sure that we're being as inclusive as possible. And then lastly, I will also work with corporations, both do keynotes for them along with my daughter, and will work with corporations if they have someone transitioning within their company. I will generally partner with HR and help them through that transition. Typically, you know, the person transitioning, I do get close to, and I know who they are, and we have conversations, but most of my work is really with the people around them who need to learn how to be a good ally to the person who is transitioning. So I've had one girl ask me, can't you just send an email? And you know, my response was, it's not all about you, which sounds terrible, but it's not. It's about the people around you wanting to be really, really good allies and helping them learn about how to do that. Great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Irene. I'm really glad you had a chance to say that. So Pepper Fee is another good friend of ours. And Pepper, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. I'm Pepper Fee. I use he, him pronouns. I am a transgender on the transmasculine area of things, although I consider myself semi-non-binary. I work at Nuance Communications, which is American multinational computer software technology corporation. We're headquartered in Burlington, Massachusetts. And we do speech recognition and artificial intelligence. I've worked at Nuance for close to 22 years, most of them as my other self. And I started my transition process 3 years ago. And I'm very active on our LGBTQ organization here at Nuance as well. And thanks for having me.
I said a key member of our TCNE and First Event team.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Had the pleasure of volunteering with TCNE and hope to continue that great work going forward as well. I really enjoy working with you guys.
Great.
Gals, sorry.
Thanks, Pepper. And so, again, my name is Sheryl Caton. I'm an executive director for a nationwide nonprofit, and I take care of the Boston territory for that organization. My journey is interesting. I mean, I've been trans my whole life, but only recently have started to come out in my corporate world or in my nonprofit world. And so that's been interesting. I'm a co-chair for our for our LGBT employee resource group. And I'm in the process of my full transition, my social and physical transition. And then, what else did I want to say about that? Oh, and then of course, I volunteer for TCNE as well and other places throughout the trans community. And an active member, TCNE is an active member of the Chamber of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce as well. So with all of that said, I'm going to jump in and just ask a bunch of questions and we'll just have our conversation. And certainly, as Thais mentioned, grab your own questions. If you hear something that somebody's talking about and you want us to expand on it, feel free to throw that in the chat, in the Q&A, and we'll be able to come back to it. So Pepper and Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about, and me personally, because I'm super interested, tell us a little bit about your transition on the job.
Sure, I'll start just since Pepper's muted and I forgot to mute myself. So, yeah, so as I mentioned, I work at MathWorks. We are currently about a 5,500, 6,000 person software company, global presence with maybe a third of us at the headquarters in Natick. I just celebrated my 20th anniversary with the company, and I transitioned in place 7 years ago. And so by that term, in place, meaning same person, same job, just came in the next day as Michelle. Do you want me to outline the process, the short version of the process we followed, Cheryl, or how it went, or what?
Yeah, just a thumbnail sketch of maybe if there's a highlight that really went really well, better than you expected, or if there's a low light that like, oh my God, that was way more challenging. Okay. Just to sort of set the tone.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing, it was a ton of work to pull my company along because I was the first person to transition at my employer. We had one or two other trans people there, but they had transitioned before they came in, so they didn't have to manage that. And so it was, it took a while, maybe a little longer than I would have liked. In my case, maybe about 5 months from when I've really pulled the trigger with them and said, yes, I'm doing it, to when I actually transitioned. And it's very much the culture of, measure twice, cut once. We're a company by engineers for engineers. And so they wanted to make sure that, everybody's considerations and feelings and cultural sensitivities were addressed. And so I had to work with them to help them say, actually, what we have to do is address my needs, and not worry so much about what other people might think. So we have, we're a global company. A lot of our local staff are international, some Europeans, lots of people from various Asian cultures. And so they had some fears about that. So I just had to work them through those things. Maybe I'll save some of the more challenging parts for a little bit later in the conversation.
Great, thanks. I'm taking notes too. You said some really great stuff I want to come back to myself. And Pepper, tell us a little bit about your experience, a little bit more recent. You said 3 years ago, is that right?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I was an out lesbian when I first started working for Nuance. And it was a very comfortable environment. I mean, I didn't make a big deal of it, but everybody knew. Nobody really seemed to care. But we didn't really have any employee resource groups or anything at that point in time. And so then, like maybe 4 years ago, our executive team, started putting a lot of those things in place. And in the process, honestly, in the process of being involved with our Pride group, I met a few trans people, and I've known since I was 11, but I just never thought I could do anything about it. And I became involved in this group, and it was honestly one of the things that actually pushed me over the edge to finally, take the first steps to do it. Because the two things that were the most terrifying to me was my relationship with my wife and what is going to happen at work, because everybody has known me for such a long time. I was terrified. And I had a very positive experience. I kind of took the tack that they wanted to get this done. They wanted to do it right. And I was on the journey. So let's do the journey together. And so I immediately partnered with HR and said, like, look, you want to learn? I've got to do this. I need to learn even. Let's do it together. How can you support me? And, I'll save some of this for later on, but my advice to anybody would be get in touch with your HR department if you've got one right away, and try to work with them as an ally, especially if the company is putting it out there that they want to do these things. Put your money where your mouth is, right? And because of that, I have a great support system here at work. Everybody's been great to me. I'm kind of like a celebrity now. So overall, it's been a very, very, very positive experience.
I want to maybe just call it on one thing. There's one really helpful thing that's happened in the time between when I transitioned and when you transitioned, which is we got legal protection against employment discrimination for transgender people in the workplace. And so when I was transitioning, it was not only will I be accepted, it was will I keep my job.
Right.
And it's so nice that you were just able to focus on the how will it go, will I be accepted and embraced and supported, to at least not have that fear of losing your livelihood. Yeah,
as everybody knows, or just if you're just in the culture, you can realize how rapidly the trans community has come together and really started to increase our own visibility, and all sorts of rules, corporate rules and protocols and laws on our side, as well as all sorts of struggles and folks that feel emboldened on the opposite side of that. So it's a very uneven situation. Each company is in their own journey as well. I thought it was really interesting, Pepper, that you mentioned two things. You had stuff to learn as well. And I think that that's pretty common. Folks who are trans, they understand themselves, but they don't necessarily understand how the whole world is going to operate, and you have a lot to learn. And then there's something else you said that I thought was really interesting, but I thought that Irene, in your work with other companies, do the things that Pepper and Michelle sort of shared, do you find those in lots of different companies when you go to help, or are there things that that maybe are less consistent?
Yeah. So if I'm being asked to come in and help, it's because the company doesn't have any sort of guidelines to help someone transition. So they're reaching out to me, thank goodness, right? Because they want help, and they want to do the right thing. So I've worked in very small companies that were very, very rural, about 700 employees. All the way up to international companies with tens of thousands of employees helping folks transition. And it is so wide. So this big company, 10,000 employees global, had no transition guidelines at all, right? So, fortunately, we have great transition guidelines at my company. And I was a big part of building those guidelines as a part of my Pride job, if you will. And I tease HR all the time that it took us longer to write our gender transition guidelines than it took my daughter to fully transition. And she is fully medically transitioned. So yeah, HR can be pretty slow in these big ships, right? the good thing is I have permission from my company to share them, right? So I believe that anything we're building in corporations that help anyone in the LGBTQ community or other marginalized communities from that matter, we should be sharing them, right? Because it's work that we can just give to someone else and help them along the way, rather than them taking 14 months and 55 lawyers to get to the same document.
Right.
So yeah, it really matters.
It's great that your company doesn't feel proprietary around that, which obviously that's cultural. And the more, it's great. And I hope that other companies sort of take you up on that and take up MassMutual and other companies like that who are willing to share their.
Yeah. And not all companies do, right? So I reached out to a couple when I was trying to help our first two people at MassMutual transition. And one company said, I wish you had asked me a month ago because we just trademarked them and we're going to sell them. I'm like, what do you need to sell those for? You're a gazillion-dollar company. Just give them to me. And oh, by the way, I took pictures of everything while I watched you at Out and Equal. So, but other companies will just kind of hand it to you. There's also HRC, Out and Equal, and other places. But as long as I share it in a PDF, I'm good. So, and I have it in writing, so not asking anymore.
Great, thanks. I love that we're getting some questions that are coming in. That's fantastic. We're going to make sure that we get to all of those. I'm going to keep sort of going on this train for a little bit. So I'll come back to those things. One thing I did want to mention is today's conversation is not about Trans 101. And so we're just going to pick the conversation up right where we are, which is really about transitioning on the job, getting jobs if you are trans, if you are a HR professional or someone else in the company who might want some advice and some insight into the trans experience. This is really where that conversation, we're really going to pick that conversation up from there. And so I want to sort of climb in a little bit as to what that experience is like for a trans person on the job. So if there's folks that are out there that are getting ready to transition and apprehensive about what that might be like, or if there are cis folks out there and they're trying to anticipate, all right, I've got somebody on my team that's going to transition in a couple of months. What should I expect for them 6 months down the line, a year down the line? And I think in no matter where you are in your work life, the idea of mentorship, I think, is really important. And so I wonder, Michelle and Pepper, and we'll go Pepper first this time since Michelle started last time. Before you transitioned, were you in a position to be a mentor for anybody, or if you had a mentor at that point? And then did that change your mentorship? Did you find that relationship in either direction was gendered in some way, like, oh, that kind of thing? Or did it just, smooth as silk? How did that go at all?
I mean, I would say that I was not so much a mentor, but certainly an ally when I first started out with our Pride group. I mean, there was one other person who was transitioning at the same time as me, and I had agreed to, when she came back, walk her into the office and, do all that. We sort of like tag teamed things that way. She was really important to me. Unfortunately, she passed away. But, it was really helpful to have her in my corner. And then, so it was more like mentoring for me in that case. There was a guy out on the West Coast who works for us who was very influential on me and was somebody that I could go to and talk to. And if, I try to be a good ambassador, even as I was going through the process, because, as Irene was saying, like, people just don't know. They're not trying, most of them are not trying to be, ignorant. They just don't know. There's so many things that I didn't know. And how am I supposed to expect this cis person who's living their life to know anything about, what's going on in my world? So I try to be a good ambassador. I try to be a good educator. I try to attend panels like this also at work to help people out because it's a face that they know. And, when new trans people come on board, I certainly, I'm out there, I'm on the, here's who you can ask panel on our intranet. So, I try to be as good an educator as I can be. And, even when I was presenting as gay, I did do the same. So, yeah.
Thanks so much. How about you, Michelle?
Sure. So it's sort of, I was thinking of sort of two different tracks of mentorship triggered by your question. One is on the trans and transition thing, and then the other is just sort of professional and how those professional relationships change. On the transition thing, I was guided very, very thoroughly by my therapist. So my therapist is, you know, based in the Boston area, and she's specialized in gender, in helping people with gender-related therapy for decades. And so she kind of has a playbook for how to go through this, things to be alert for. And she guided me as I managed my company, because my company had no guidebook. Like I mentioned, I was the first one. So she was definitely functioning as my mentor or my manager almost from that perspective. And then since then, I've had an opportunity to help several other people, whether it's like, one of the things my therapist does is she always brings in, so she'll often do trainings at companies, and she did a training at my company, which is just one point of the transition. You know, it's like right when the transition's happening to help people know what to expect and how to handle it. So she did that, and she always likes to bring in a transgender person who kind of looks like the person who's transitioning. You know, so bringing in somebody who's from a similar domain, similar age that people can relate to, so they can see we're not aliens. And so I've done that with her for like another friend transitioning at another company. And then I've had 2 or 3 friends at work who transitioned after I did. And I was able to work with them and help them understand how to navigate HR, and they're working with their coworkers and such. On the professional side, it's interesting. My primary mentoring relationship where I was being mentored has just continued to grow without any impact. It's a VP of engineering that I work with extremely closely. And that relationship has just only gotten stronger through my transition. And he'll occasionally sort of joke with me about how hard it is to think back to that other person who had worked, that other version of me who had worked with him, which is really cool. But since my transition, I've picked up, there's somebody else who I had worked with before, but I didn't really see her as a mentor. And she's really been a great mentor for me as in the role of being a senior, a woman who's a senior manager in an organization, and because she's blazed that path and really pushed up against a lot of boundaries. And so she helps me increase my sensitivity to the kinds of things that I wouldn't have thought about, because I entered into, by the time I transitioned, I was in a really strong spot in my organization, but I got there 100% with male privilege. And I never deny that you know, everything from getting a PhD in mechanical engineering to being welcomed into the inner technical circle of a company only came to me so easily because I had people encouraging me, not telling me I couldn't. And then since my transition, I have established mentoring relationships with several people, mostly women, and they know I'm trans, and it's mostly just around being a woman in the workplace, and we sort of share our experiences and share our professional experiences, and then doing things like panels. And I actually just spoke at the Society of Women Engineers conference, and nothing to do with trans, just as a way to sort of pay it forward for young female engineers.
Fascinating. I could keep asking you a ton of questions about that. I'm going to make little notes so I can come back to them. If I don't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah.
You know where I live.
I do. So there's a couple of questions, Irene, in the chat box, and just folks are looking for the guidelines, how to get in touch with you. And I know that some of those have been answered, and thanks so much, Thais. But I thought, Irene, I'd give you a little bit of a chance to just talk about your consultant gig and how you might get in touch with folks for those types of things, because that connectivity to HR and how maybe you work to help HR be a little bit more open to being more welcoming.
Yeah, so thank you. So I am not shy. So anyone can reach out to me. You can get me at brankconsulting@gmail.com. Any day or any time, day or night. I'm in there all the time. So feel free to reach out, and I'll see how I can help you. I'll tell you, HR can be challenging, right? So they're called human resources. And if I'm offending anybody, I'm really sorry, right? I actually hold some HR background. So I've been in HR I also have a D&I certification as well from Cornell, but I do not, they will not let me work in HR because we would fight all day long, right? So it's not the place for me, but I have learned how to work in big corporations as a consultant to HR, right? And so typically, as I said, it's either helping with guidelines or, you know, harassment policies, all the way down to just gender being in all of your policies, and having bathrooms that are there that are neutral, right? So that, you know, people don't have to choose if they're not on the binary, if you will, right? So I don't want to go to floor 17 where the only gender neutral bathroom is and I'm non-binary, or do I make a decision on a daily basis? Do I look more male or more female? How am I presenting today? Where will I be safe, right? So we do a lot of work around that. And it's the gamut, right? So if you're in northern Vermont, 4 miles from the Canadian border, they didn't even know what I was talking about to start with. So it was soup to nuts, everything, right? And then you work in bigger corporations and you think that they would have everything. And then they go, yeah, we haven't even thought about that. What I'm seeing more and more is that people are recognizing what they don't have, and they're willing to bring in a consultant to help them because they want to do it right. And I'll tell you, every time I do this, I probably have a half a dozen folks that I've helped in corporate America. The single question that always comes out is, okay, I get the name, I get the pronouns. I want them to know I support them. What do I do? I'm like, well, you're not high-fiving in the hallways, right? So you just say, hello, Sheryl. That's all you have to do, right? You just use their name and take their lead, right? That's really, it's so basic, but if you don't know, you just don't know. Yeah.
That's great.
Can I comment a little bit on that support thread?
Yeah.
I'll say the things that people did to me that I found supportive. The primary thing, so there was a very large scale communication that went out when I transitioned. It literally went to like 2,000 people because they didn't know how else to do it. And 130 people emailed me directly to offer their support. That was awesome.
Yeah.
It made me feel really good. That was like, this email went out and I took a week off, and it made me feel much more confident going in a week later that I had that much support. I did have allies that I had aligned, you know, people I've been out to for a while before. There were some questions around this I see in the Q&A. And I tried to put them in as plants to say, you know, like, it would be awesome if you could correct people when they misname me or mispronoun me, so that it's not always me doing it. And so lots of people who would just put in the effort to get my name right, put in the extra effort for pronouns, which is much harder than name, but then to have other people who could sort of take somebody aside and help correct them, that I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Michelle. So when we're in with a corporation with someone transitioning, we're often saying things like, if you see someone else slip with a pronoun, you can say something like, you meant she, and move on. Right. And so it's all about educating the people around you. Did 2,000 people need to get that email? Probably not. Right. It's people who know you by name and face and people you know by name and face. That's your need to know circle. Right.
That was about 500 people. So
yeah. So it, you know, it really does depend, but I think you're absolutely right. You know, what we call that, signal boosting, right? Like we do for other women when we're surrounded by men, and nothing about you, Pepper, but oftentimes men will ignore an idea that a woman brings up, right? And then the man brings it up and everyone goes, yeah, that's a great idea. And they're like, she just said that, right? So it's a form of signal boosting with pronouns, with names. I tell them, use your name as often as possible, use pronouns as often as possible, and correct people and get used to correcting people. You know, you don't do it on purpose. They need to be corrected. Love that.
Good. Amplifying
real quick points on that. I think the one of the funniest things that happened with me is some of my more probably politically conservative colleagues have been the most ardent. They're like, no, you meant he. And I just find it really funny. I actually find like the people who are sort of like more what I would say like aligned with me are like, oh well, it's just you. Like I'm so, oops.
Don't you love that?
But the other side, they're like, no, you got it wrong.
Isn't that fascinating? That's
it
great.
is. And I think it's important what we do in a corporation as well. We always make sure the manager's on board, and we do 3 levels up from the manager. So wherever that manager's level is, we generally go 3 levels up, if you would, in the org chart, because the support has got to come from the top of that organization. So I think that's also very, very important. And I think you're absolutely right, Pepper. When I do these trainings, it's the person that you just don't think are going to stand up and say, hey, how do I support them? It's never the one you think that's going to say it. So I think you're absolutely right. Love that.
It's good to go into all those situations with an open mind so you find out where people really are. I want to talk a little bit about, there's a couple of questions in here, and it's come up a few times, the whole idea of allies and boosting confidence before the person might transition. Pepper, you've mentioned a couple times the employee resource group at your firm, the Pride group, how that bolstered your confidence. And then all that conversation we just had really had a lot to do with how allies support us. There's a question in that, let me make sure I get it just right. How important is it to find allies among colleagues prior to going to HR or my manager? A lot of that is stuff like Michelle was saying, I'm going to make sure that I find people who are going to be my ally before I start. But if anybody wants to put a little bit of an exclamation point on the employee resource groups or the ability to find allies before you transition or before that sort of opens up, I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I would really recommend it. I mean, I had, like I say, I was terrified. And it's so funny now looking back, because I thought, oh my God, it's going to get out on the grapevine and everybody's going to be talking about it. And, they're all going to be wondering, like, what kind of operations did you have? And they're all going to be like, and not at all. I'm very blessed. And if anything, people just, like, I broadcasted in like 3 different places and nobody, like, so many people still didn't get the memo. Right.
Right.
But I was seeing a therapist who said, like, don't act like it's a tumor.
Right.
Start out with a positive attitude. This is a good thing that you're doing. So first of all, it starts with you. Mm-hmm. Start out with a positive attitude. And then, exactly like Michelle said, get your allies, the people that who are going to support you. Get your support network at work. I did that with my colleagues, starting with sort of my immediate circle and then working out from there. And also our HR benefits person, I got to know him really well. And he was a phenomenal supporter for me. He would go to bat with me with the insurance company if things weren't quite working out the way they were supposed to. So
that's a good ally.
There was some there, but I had to do some of the work, and it's maybe seems a little unfair, but I had to do some of the work to make sure that my experience was going to go well. And I recommend that.
Well, so I'm in that place right now where I'm out to my board of directors, and I'm out to my senior management team and all those types of folks, and more and more folks across the country. And I build my ally group, which gives me more coverage, which allows me to build it a little bit further and a little bit further, but I'm still certainly not there yet. And I've started to contextualize the process while I'm in it. So unlike Michelle and Pepper, who are past it, and the way I contextualize it for cis folks is I really talk about, kind of a goofy analogy maybe, but I talk about it almost like I'm going through a life change, like any other life change. Like I'm going to change my job, I'm going to get married, I'm going to retire. All these life changes, they're really something that we look forward to. So I'm sort of in my my engagement time. There's a date in the future, not quite sure when it is yet. I'm going to change. I'm going to come to work. You're going to interact with me differently than you did before. I'm going to change my name. Like, that's a whole thing. And we're going to look forward to it as something that it's just another chapter in my life. And I think that contextualizing that to things that others can relate to helps them say, like, oh, yeah, I would get happy if you were going to get married or you were going to do this or whatever's going to happen, we would celebrate that. I totally get that. It's just something that not everybody goes through, where lots of folks get married, lots of folks retire, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I want to outline a little bit of my situation. I think it was a little different. So we don't really have an employee resource group at my company. We had like a mailing list of 20 people. That's LGBT people. Now we're starting some diversity and inclusion work the last few years, but that's not an employee resource group. That's diversity and inclusion work. That's different. You know, it's things like, there's a woman I have been working with fairly closely for about 6 years, and I didn't know she was a lesbian until I came out. Because so many people in my company, just our culture, are a little bit more private about their personal lives. And so I'm not. I've always been just like, I mean, obviously before I transitioned, I didn't tell everybody who I was and what my whole life was, but I did live a significant life as a woman, even while I was still presenting male at work and at home. So I just want to outline a little bit of the steps that I took that I found helpful. So I reached out to HR before I decided I would ever transition. Like I had a glimmer of a sense of like, I think I'm going in that direction and I want to know if my company is going to be with me. And so I had a really strong relationship from actually a former mentor of mine as I was growing into management, who I reached out to, who was at that point was our head of HR, and just said, I don't know where I'm going, but I wanted to make sure you guys are with me. And so I feel lucky that I had the relationships and the confidence to do that, where a lot of us just fear rejection. And so, you know, I know that doesn't translate to everybody. And then I didn't know I was building the ally network, but that's what I was doing. But it was really just women that I was close friends with that I felt very comfortable sharing with. And it was like, what'd you do this weekend? Well, funny you should ask. I was dancing at a club with 1,000 other lesbians. And then you have to like unpack that, right? One friend, just an example of how allyship really helped. I was on vacation / medical leave, actually happened to be trans-related stuff before I had transitioned. And I was like kind of getting closer to thinking about it, but not really sure. And she messaged me and said, people are talking about you. And I've been we have a gym at work. I've been going to the locker room and I've been on hormones for 1.5 years, and you're in a men's locker room and been on cross-gender female hormones. And my body didn't look appropriate for being in a men's locker room. And that was exactly the switch that said, okay, I'm going to pull the trigger. And then Monday when I got back, I reached out to HR and said, let's do this, and it was essential that I had that person on the ground who was aware of what was going on with me and could give me that read. And I think that saved me several months of embarrassment. And then HR gave me a partner, like you guys described, sort of work through it with me, it's just awesome to have a company invest like that.
I find it amazing to think about the external forces that inform our decisions, Michelle. That idea, like, I'm there, I'm getting there, I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. Oh, apparently that's the minute. You didn't know what you were looking for, but when it showed up, you knew that was the time.
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot. And it's great to have friends and allies to help you interpret that stuff. It's great. There are a ton of questions and they're kind of meaty. So I'm going to go and climb through them. Hi, Michael. Did you just come on because you're going to help me with the Q&A?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Michael. I'm with the Chamber. I'm popping in to help out with questions so that our panelists can provide you all the answers, because you all have such amazing questions here.
Really do.
So some of these you guys have kind of covered already, but I want to just bring them back up in case there are any additional comments. And these two are kind of related. This question says, what can I do if my HR department is less enthusiastic about being trans-friendly? Obviously, they can't be discriminatory because of the law, but neither are they helpful. And then a related question later on was, support at the top is important, but what should you do if support at the top is lukewarm?
Yeah.
I think Irene, maybe, since you work most with different companies.
Yeah, so I'll be glad to take that one. And every company is different. So, I come from a company that is absolutely inclusive, right? From the very top down. I mean, I write to the CEO every once in a while when they give money or they do something for the trans community. I'm like, it's me again. You might not remember me, but thank you. And he always writes back and says, I can't forget you and we're not going to stop this fight, right? Because this fight is never really going to be over. And it goes all the way to, you know, the small company in Vermont that I'm pretty sure the HR guy didn't like me and didn't like what I was teaching the people there, but he knew he had to do it, right? Because we have to be inclusive. The world is an inclusive place. The woman who transitioned was actually at First Event and found me at First Event, which was by happenstance, thank goodness. And she had a friend in HR, or someone that was connected to HR, and they went in together. So she found an ally. They went in with my information. She said, I need to transition at work and you should call this person, right? I'm going to say, like Michelle, you said, it takes so much bravery to do this. I just, you know, I think about myself going to work every day and I have to pretend I'm patient, right? And it makes me super tired. I didn't teach my kids to tie their shoes. I do not have patience, but I look it, right? And I'm super tired when I get home. So as I talk to people, I'm like, can you imagine going to work, someone that you're not, all day long for 10 years, right? Or 20, or however many years. You know, so the lukewarm piece, one, reach out to me and I'd love to talk in more detail because it could take a really long time here. Companies are gonna have to change, and it's people like this group here that are gonna help them get there. Again, I don't have the magic bullet. If you have a specific instance, please do reach out to me. The woman I helped at my own work had gone to HR over 10 years, 3 times, and each time got a lukewarm response. And one person even told her manager, which is completely against every single policy and practice that should be in a company. Years ago, not the same players today. So sometimes you have to be that spark. You have to be that person. You have to start, right? That's the best advice I have. And reach out to me.
Good stuff, Irene. Thanks.
You're welcome.
A similar question in that vein is, we have one attendee who would like to hear if anyone has experience transitioning at a relatively conservative, small or medium-sized business. It is a lot harder to be an advocate because everyone knows you and works with you, and you may be the only one or the first one to transition.
You'll just have to wait and read my book.
Yeah, Pepper and I are both larger companies that were quite welcoming.
And my organization is very conservative. And so, you know, I'm teaching and I go slow and I grow my ally group one person at a time. And each time I grow it, I feel more comfortable. And so it's a long, slow process. 27 years I've been working there. I am anxious for that day and I still go slow to do it. So I really can empathize, and we should be able to put our emails out there somehow so that you can ask me more directly. But it's not a small company, but it is super conservative. Mine, so I can relate.
Yeah, and I will add, the company that I was talking about up in Vermont, super conservative, absolutely no diversity in this particular community. I think there were maybe 700 employees at the most. It might even have been smaller. And you know what? You'd be surprised. You know what? People want to be good. They just need to know how.
That's right.
So the person who's asking that, email me. We'll talk a little bit more and see if I can't help you out a little bit with that. But again, I've been in all sorts of companies and I haven't met a bad person. I haven't. They just don't know.
Yeah, I think I have worked in small companies and I can see, you know, definitely could see how that would be quite difficult because I'm still in touch with people at some of those small companies. But I do think we can't start out with the idea that the other people have ill intent, right? Like, yes, of course, there are always going to be people out there who don't accept us. And you know, I'm speaking about this as a trans guy. Like for trans women, it's much more difficult. I'm dealing with vendors who never met me before, and it's he. So you know, it's no it's not a problem. So I can't speak to that challenge, but you know, I do think it starts out with just be yourself, and don't assume that the other side is antagonistic right off the bat, because if you start out that way, you're gonna filter everything through a negative slant, and just, you know, try to be kind. And if somebody is like just not having anything to do with it, you know, if you can, move on. And again, there's policies in place. It's the law. So, you know, if somebody's causing you trouble, that's illegal.
Good for you.
Our next question is, it can be very difficult to get a read for existing culture regarding transgender and LGBT matters when applying for a job someplace. Do you have any insight into determining if a potential employer is going to be cool about an out trans non-binary person in the workplace, as opposed to if the employer is going to be confused and or discriminatory, either accidentally or on purpose? I know what I have tried historically, but looking for any ideas that you might have used.
I'm a big believer in do your homework. So, you know, what are their awards? Are they, like, we have an HRC award for, you know, 100% compliance. What do other people say about them who are trans or non-binary? You know, what's the word on the street? There's plenty of resources where you can go and find that stuff out. I personally, I wouldn't go to work for a company that there was bad reviews or no reviews. I just wouldn't even start.
I need you to talk to my 23-year-old me.
Well, I'd have to talk to my 23-year-old me too.
In little plug, obviously, if they're a member of the LGBT chamber or things like that, same as where you're getting your awards from, those types of indications certainly help.
Next question. I started transitioning 2 years ago, but I had a really hard time finding transgender mentors who are middle-aged and work in professional fields, because so many successful trans professionals are stealth. Where and how do you find other members of the transgender professional community who can be mentors?
The first event, when we have it in person, is a great place to meet people. We had 1,500 people last year, trans and allies, and so you can kind of meet and connect with people. Pepper and I did both put our LinkedIn profiles in the chat, so you at least can reach out to the two of us. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it is tricky. You know, I'm fairly out, but not in my, like, if you Google the work side of me, you're not going to see things that say I'm an out trans woman. You know. So that is a little tricky. I'm certainly happy to chat with you.
Same.
Yeah, I would say another resource from the workplace, depending on the size of your workplace, is Out and Equal. So they do an annual conference where I think there were 6,000 attendees. We did it virtually this year. It actually worked. And about 10% are trans professionals, both male and female. So you can get your company to send you there. It's in I think it's in Disney in October. So it's a really great place to meet other professionals. And they have a lot of different work groups and things like that as well.
There are a few Facebook groups I'm on, like some combination of trans women, professional, maybe New England or not. Just so I maybe try just Google. They're not particularly active, but try Googling on or looking through Facebook for groups like that. And you may be able to find some peers.
Thank you. In what ways does COVID affect the process of transitioning at work? I'm concerned that it will drag out the adjustment period rather than just ripping off the Band-Aid if everyone was in the office.
For sure. Thank God for video. That's all I can say.
Wow. I think it's good for, so I really like sort of boosted my, I went full throttle last February, even though it's been 3 years. And I know when I come back, there's not going to be any more she's.
Oh, that's interesting.
So actually, it's a time warp that I just get to, like, I mean, yeah, they see me on video, but I think it's going to be very different when they see me in person.
Huh. That's so fascinating. My transit, I'm in the middle of that whole thing, and literally during the entire thing. So I haven't seen people face to face. I did run into our, not run into, but I had a face-to-face mask-to-mask meeting with our CFO, and I took off my mask at one point. And I said, what do you think? And I was presenting as male, and she was like, oh, I see Sheryl all the time, like, no question. And so I'm like, well, I wonder what that's really gonna feel like when I come out of that whole thing, and we can actually see people face to face and not do little tiny thumbnails. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I disagree. I agree with the challenge. I don't have any insights because especially as trans women, you know, like our voices tend to not be great. At least mine's not great. And so we rely on, it's a whole combination of cues, like gigantic hands, right? Whole combination of cues to try to project to people the gender that we want them to just innately recognize, right? You know, like if you kind of want people to not have to think about it and say she, her.
Right.
You know, and I've learned, and still to this day, if somebody's sitting next to me in a conference room and we're both looking in that direction and I talk, they have a good chance of using male pronouns next time they refer to me because they're not looking at me. And so it is trickier. That's what I was saying, thank God for video, because you at least have, you know, some attempt at this part being, you know, a gender conforming presentation if that's important to you. But it's being in real world where all those pieces kind of add up to help. So it's tricky. Maybe it's an opportunity because, you know, I'm 6'1", and that's less obvious when I'm on video. I hired 2 people who had no idea I was a gigantic Amazonian woman, you know, when we first met. I don't know.
All right, thank you all. Next question. We are a 100+ employee company, and I've been there for 12+ years when there were only 25 of us. I'm currently coming out to individuals that I am close to, but plan to drop the bomb, so to speak, in a company-wide email next week while HR is working things out. I have great support from the board of directors, CEO, CTO, and HR. I'm out to 10 people, and they are all incredibly supportive. With COVID, everyone is working from home, so most of the coming out concerns are moot. I'm questioning if there is any concern with my approach. Honestly, I do not fear my job, and my experience has been so positive. I have such a conviction for what I am doing and have such a shield of courage. So their question is essentially if any of you think they should be concerned about their approach at all.
So you're sending just to make sure, I'm looking at the question. You want to send your own email to the entire company while HR is working on this? I'll let Irene take that, though my cynicism and my question probably half answered my side.
Right on.
Yeah, so I'll answer quickly that I believe it's HR's responsibility. I don't care how big your company is, but if that's what you've chosen to do, and you're already going down that path, what I would recommend is in that email, make sure you're putting links for education. Transequality.org is a really good one with very kind of trans 101, nice little film in there. I use it all the time, understanding transgender people. So I always go to that particular website if I can't get enough information to folks. So I would absolutely make sure you put some education in there. It's vitally important for your well-being and for the people around you who want to be good.
So I'll say I would have concerns about what you're doing. I actually, one of the people I coached or mentored through her transition was just like, it was like Tuesday. She's like, I'm going to transition on Friday. I was like, all right, do you want to, you know, workshop this, work through some of these things? Like, if you're stonewalled by HR and you're like, look, guys, you are getting in my way of being myself, right on. I mean, you've got to do it, but it sounds like they're partnering with you. And so from just purely from the professional perspective, if I'm partnering with somebody on something and then I short circuit them, I'd be really concerned about that hurting my relationships. In addition to like the risks that Irene said, for me, it was extremely helpful that the email came from the head of HR. And the company said, Michelle is transitioning. You will use this name. You will use this pronoun. We have no tolerance for anything otherwise. And so it made it that much easier for me to know that they were stating clearly they had 100% had my back.
And one of the things about the trans experience, especially as you're approaching that, that coming out moment, that full coming out moment, is the compulsion to get there, and you're getting all this positive feedback from your friends and your allies, and you're like, I can do this, I can do this. But it's still a business decision. It's still your career that you're talking about. And so you want to uncouple your trans identity and your trans journey and your corporate decision, your career decision making. At least you want to, and maybe you've already done all that. And that's okay. You certainly, it's your choice. You do what you need to do. But I think there's multiple layers of this decision making that folks are sort of talking to you about.
Yeah, and if I can add for everyone on the phone, which we didn't talk about earlier, if you have external customers, patients, vendors, clients that you work with externally, they need to know too, right? So typically we're either doing that face-to-face or some sort of letter. In my own company, the manager calls every client for the person who's transitioning. So, you know, it's your company's responsibility. I understand you're in a small company, but don't forget about external people as well, who might know you as you are today.
And
I can provide letters to anyone who wants them for if you do need to send something out externally.
Yeah, and that person did just jump. They did pop up to clarify that the email is coming from HR, but they're adding their own like personal.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Sorry about that. Then go all in.
So I know we're coming up on 1 o'clock. We're gonna try and fit one more question in, and if I apologize, there's a lot of questions. So if we didn't get to it, we encourage you to reach out. Everyone's LinkedIn's or emails are in the chat, and if you missed any of those, feel free to send me an email. People are asking about the recording. We are going to have a recording on our YouTube channel. That should be going up in around early December. It would be sooner, but the holiday is next week, so that complicates things a little bit. But yeah, so I'll get to this last question, which is, how do you approach HR management about time off for trans-related medical procedures? Many places will say they support it, but often don't have policies around leave for medical procedures.
So I'll take that, at least from my experience. It has no bearing whatsoever what the root is of your medical procedures. That's it. So you need time off, you get your doctors to send them a note saying what you need. And, you know, I chose to disclose some information. I had a major surgery a couple of years ago and I was out for 6 weeks. And I chose to disclose some information so that I could get more flexibility to work the amount that I wanted to work during that time instead of just taking the whole thing off. But, you know, it's more just basic employment law in terms of, you know, how well they meet you for time off, whether they have short-term disability, all those kinds of things. The fact that it's trans-related shouldn't be a factor, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. It's not necessary. It's not any of their business, really.
All right. Thank you so much. So we are at 1 o'clock, so I want to jump in and just respect everyone's time. So I want to say thank you, everybody, so much for joining our panel today, both attendees and panelists. We super appreciate it. I think the attendees judging by the questions, the attendees clearly got a lot out of it, and we're so grateful that you're able to be part of our Fall 2020 LGBTQ+ virtual job fair with its very long title. And just as a note to attendees, once again, this will be going up on YouTube. Feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions, michael.o'neill, which is, it's just spelled like my name is here, at malgbtcc.org. That's listed somewhere in chat. Everyone's contact info is also listed in chat. And we do have one more panel tomorrow about the job search and job inclusion for LGBTQ people with disabilities. That can be registered for by going to our website, which is just malgbtcc.org. You can also check us out on Facebook for info on that as well. And we have a job board where there are open job positions listed that you can look for and apply at partner companies that we have found to be LGBT friendly. Thank you, everybody, once again. I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. And thank you again to all of our panelists. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for the great questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.